I'm leading this one. Fuck you.
Okay.
You've let you talk for too long without turning on the goddamn camera. All right.
We're welcome everyone to a kind of abridged Jams and Tea Now episode because we don't really have necessarily a whole lot of topics or news items, and if they did happen, they happened too long ago to be relevant right now. But there have been some things that have happened recently in the music world and conversations that have been happening where Jen and I, we're yappers and we got to throw our hat in the ring sometimes. And Jen, why don't you tell us about what we were just yapping about moments ago that I threatened to start yelling about to no one in particular because we weren't even recording.
You were about to get yourself in a screaming fit over Billy Corgan again, so I need our audience to be caught up on what got us
Second
here
verse,
again.
same as the first, baby.
Some things never change.
Never changes. I am always on some level bitching about Billy Corgan.
So Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins was on a podcast recently where he was alleging that the CIA conspired to kill rock music in the 90s by changing what was popular on MTV. And I think that's it.
That's pretty much. And it is a classic case of this being endemic of this is an opinion, it's not an opinion that's genuinely held. It's an opinion that comes from a certain kind of person being unable to grapple with reality. Billy Corgan has been a guy who, ever since the 90s, has just never been able to let shit go and has been defined by the battles that he very wrongly picks. Like, he always tries to insert himself into the conversation and make himself more important. Like, if you've ever heard him talk about Kurt Cobain, a guy who didn't like him, you can get the impression that it's like, oh, you're really trying to insert yourself into the narrative of rock music by like trying to make yourself appear on the level of Cobain and like trying to paint yourself in the same tortured artist light when in actuality the reason why you were lonely in this time period was because nobody in your band could fucking stand you and they all left.
As the person with more Smashing Pumpkins history behind you than me, why is this time period something he's so fixated on? Like, why is this the crux of his conspiracy theory?
Well, I mean, it has to do with the fact that it was because this time period was when the Smashing Pumpkins were releasing their best material. And even in their heyday, the Smashing Pumpkins were very easy to see as underdogs, only in hindsight, though, because they had this particular sound about them that didn't align them with anything that was either in the establishment or directly anti-establishment like grunge. Go back and listen to Nirvana, go listen to Soundgarden. Those are albums that, they have the grungy, dirty aesthetic of albums that don't necessarily even care if they're heard. Like Bleach is an album that is like improperly mixed. It doesn't even sound good. And these things existed in proximity to Corgan, who was making rock music at the time and desperately wanted to be seen as a Chris Cornell or as a Kurt Cobain or as a this or as a that. He wanted to be a creative visionary and he wanted the respect that they had. So whenever, at the time, the critics didn't love the Smashing Pumpkins because they sounded more commercial than the anti-commercial guys. And anything that's not anti-commercial is because it's black and white. Nobody is able to deal in nuance. Nothing has changed at all in the 30 years since this all happened. But it is this thing where Corgan just, he has to find something to pick at to just blame all of his problems on, essentially. Like, this is something that's so specific to a certain kind of narcissist. And I know it sounds like I'm throwing around a lot of nasty sounding buzzwords to describe a man I don't like, and that is very true. But it is also because this is simply the truth. When he got involved in a feud with Pavement, it was because he misinterpreted their lyrics as a slight against his band. He wasn't even correct because they weren't even, it was a filler lyric. And he was like, yeah, we've got no bad blood. And Billy Corgan made it his life's mission to hold a grudge against fucking Pavement, a
Everybody
bunch
want to
of
be demon
fucking
until they get shipped by a throwaway.
I mean, it's It's exactly the same thing. And he wanted that cred that they did, and he wanted all these things. And that pivoted because like when he stopped making music that was commercially relevant, he pivoted into being this kind of weirdo libertarian presence and appearing on podcasts in the 2000s and stuff. And the Smashing Pumpkins music became like way overtly political, like super duper political, to its detriment, mind you. But also he just became this guy who just blamed everything for his shortcomings and failures. Just nobody, he has never been responsible. In his mind, he is not at fault for anything bad that ever happened to him. Darcy Retzky leaving the band, no, that had to have been her. Everybody leaving the band to for his weirdo phase when they made an album like, oh God, I don't even remember the name of it because it's so fucking awful. But like these are things that happen because of your behavior, Billy, and now he is actively blaming hip hop and the CIA for the death of rock music, even though, buddy, the death of rock music happened with Kurt Cobain. Like, if you want to track it backwards, everything afterwards has been the dying gasp of rock music. And no, it's not actually going to die, but in the sense that we're not going to have superstars like that again. It's the way that people were talking about hip hop and were kind of worried about it for a little while there because they were like, is our hip hop stars dying? And that's even still something we're kind of worried about now because it's like after Kendrick, after Tyler, who's going to be the new guard? Who's going to be the showman? Who's going to have commercial movement? Are they going to be able to hold these banners up in the same way? It's always happened. These things occur naturally. Buddy, the CIA was too busy killing people overseas in the 90s and 2000s in order to kill rock music. They had other more sinister priorities than making sure you didn't sell well, you conceited prick.
I mean, I shouldn't denigrate the idea that the CIA has a hand in the direction of the
No,
culture. It absolutely does.
provably true. Provably
Provably
true.
true. But when you get into this like conspiratorial thinking, you blind yourself to observable changes in trends that you can just look at from a material perspective and get a lot of insight out of. You know, the CIA didn't kill rock music. It was MTV becoming more popular, or it was the nationalization of radio stations around the country that led to a smaller variety of artists being played. Or fast forward to today, right? We've already seen this conversation kind of happen in other places around other genres where like I remember back in whenever that Morgan Wallen double album came out, the first
Yeah,
one, the one that people actually like, and
dangerous.
the one that created that kind of commercial sea change, Dangerous. I remember when that album came out, there was a lot of talk of like, well, now that all this country music is like actively taking up space on the Billboard Hot 100, like what do we do with all that other music? And what I think we all need to learn is that music's general ability to have an impact on the culture has been dulling for the past 20 years
For sure.
as a consequence of there being more music coming out every day than there
The
was
internet.
20 years ago. And
Yeah.
that's fine.
Yeah,
It's
it
a
is.
lot easier to get a number one song on Billboard in 2025, 2026 than it was in 1997. And that's fine. In some ways, it's shitty that the rules have changed, and it's shitty that like Billboard is no longer a useful metric to by which to judge the culture. But like it never was. You
It
just couldn't
never
see
was.
beyond the horizon. I was watching that. Shout out to Crimes New Roman, who put out this great new video talking about like self-care
Mm.
apps and like things that want you to build a better relationship with your phone that are just keeping you on your phone. But like it's actually not the problem that you anyway. Go watch the video. Shout out to the homie. But
No, very true.
something that he was getting at was that when you're able to look past these kinds of objective measures of anything that ultimately is just a piece of technology that somebody invented, when you're able to see beyond the horizon of that, you're going to be able to get maybe not a more materialist, pragmatic, realist understanding of what the world actually is and what the culture actually is. But you are going to have to look for that yourself and you're going to have to draw your own conclusions. And that I find is a helpful process. Thinking about things helps me feel better about them.
It's
Not just like looking at numbers and getting scared.
It's well, that's the thing, is that that's the problem that everybody has, is that this is two things. This is one, somebody complaining about the problems inherent with capitalism without realizing that's what they're complaining about. So many voices and concerns like this are just that, because it's like, dude, record labels have not been incentivized to pay artists. That's another reason why. That's another reason why. Because these things that are more expensive to maintain, to have that kind of presence, it's difficult. But the real problem though, is that people are simply complaining about the fact that rock music isn't being thrust in front of them and that they have to apply minimal effort to go and seek it out. Because, dude, again, the best thing I ever did for my music taste, other than getting a bunch of friends who had different music tastes than me to introduce me to other things, was getting on Rate Your Music and looking into things and learning about genres and seeing what people liked. You have to take just an iota of effort into listening to things. And I promise you, that is an investment that has returns, because the effort you have to apply, it's not that much. It's not that difficult. This passive listening thing of like listening to whatever Spotify feeds you or whatever YouTube feeds you or whatever the hell, it's like that is your fault. You, the listener, you have to take steps. You have to move past it. So, Billy, you're not really complaining about this. What you're actually complaining about is that the industry is not catering to your laziness. And frankly, it never has and never should. I'm not defending the music industry. Lord knows it's responsible for a great many evils, and we try to promote artists who work outside of that system. But I mean, Jesus Christ, dude, you have to be able to see things for what they are. And things are good. Like, this can all be traced back to fucking people losing their shit when Dylan went electric. Like, these things are things that will not matter in 10 years. No one will be talking about these with this frame of reference because it's wrong. If you were a type of person in 2026 to be, oh yeah, I didn't like Dylan's electric phase, you're a fucking clown. You are a clown. What are we doing, guys? This thing, like it was like I was saying to Jen before we recorded, is that like this happens when any new thing becomes popular, is that like tastemakers and
Yeah, it's
all
like
this
the
will,
inevitable passage of time.
it's like when punk got big in the 90s off of the late 80s having this really underground alternative rock movement. And then when, again, I say a band like Converge, for instance, that we talked about recently on the show, everybody thought that they were a bunch of young dudes who were a bunch of emo pussies crying about and screaming and all this stuff. And now they're the most respectable metal band in the genre. This kind of like tepid, like they're not real, like, you have, these arguments have never been on the right side of history ever. And when we live in a time when genre matters way less than it ever has, if you use it as anything other than a way to classify music in a broad sense, lost the plot. It doesn't matter anymore. These scenes can come from anywhere, can come from anyone, and they're just as authentic or not authentic as the rest of the music that you can compare it to. It's not special. It's not different. You're not special. You're not different. Everyone will die.
Is he just mad that like My Chemical Romance is going on a big stadium tour and getting invited to all these festivals that he's not going to? Like,
I mean, like,
I'm
that's the
not, I shouldn't make any such shallow accusations, but like, come on,
Billy
man.
Corgan is a shallow person, though. Like, that's the kind of thing that would bother him. He is perturbed by silly, stupid little things, and then, uses this as a thing to hide behind. And then there are people who will come along and be like, oh, this guy, because he's a respected figure in rock music, he knows what he's talking about. He's been in the industry. No, he hasn't. He hasn't been on that side of the industry. He has never been one of the suits making the executive decisions. And that's kind of the problem, is that he doesn't understand how this works, so he never bothered and just went on and kept on keeping on. Like, every version of this argument boils down to one simple truth. The kids these days, you know, I used to be hip, but they said I wasn't hip anymore, and now everything I like is unhip. Everyone's just Abe Simpson.
I would say insert Abe Simpson here.
It's
Um,
the same. It's you're just upset that things are different. And I'm not saying that there aren't problems right now, but there were problems then. There are problems now. There are always problems. It's why you should work to better the system instead of just saying, because it's lazy.
and the cure to that, as a person who just wants to like sit around and listen to good music, the cure to that is to find more good music. Like
Like
just try.
I'm gonna tr
Curate for yourself.
I'm gonna try not to sound like a boomer when I say this, but like I want you all to think about where you are in the stage of human progress as a whole. We exist right now on the internet, on this computer, and we have the Library of Alexandria at our very fingertips. Things that people 100 years ago would have never thought fucking possible. We may not live in a shining utopia, but good God, do we have so much to appreciate at our disposal. So, frankly, if you're one of the people who's like, there's no good this these days. You have just admitted intellectual defeat and told me you are lazy. If there's nothing, if you have scoured the earth and everything you have consumed, I mean, like, congrats, I guess, but like,
I don't
you're
know,
so
man. And at some point, you got to quit using the big tent pole as a scapegoat. Like, put down Rolling Stone, go find something weird on SoundCloud and follow some links.
this is a kind of wraparound into this is why you should listen to our podcast. And I'm not saying that because I think that we're great at what we do or anything, but I am saying that because there's not a lot of people who are doing it like we're doing it. So at least try to listen to people who are not huge movers and shakers. But even then, I mean, like, you are doing more than 99% of most people if you go on recommendations based entirely on the taste of Anthony Fantano. If you pay attention to fucking anybody at all, and you take their recommendations as gospel and you filter
I would
what
say
you listen to through
if you
them,
don't just use them as like proxies for your Stan War BS and you're actually listening to what people are saying, you're
don't
already doing more than like 99% of people on the internet.
the worst kind of music fan, and I do mean the worst, is the ones that use sales metrics in arguments. If you do that, it I'm sorry,
It's
unless
so
you are
over.
explicitly debating the merit of commercial success, this very specific thing, it doesn't matter, buddy. Like I don't like if you're talking about why you think Eternal Sunshine is a better album than Brat and you're using sales figures to make your point, you I'm going to say it nicely. You're stupid. You don't know how to actually articulate what you're trying to say. So you rely on something that is very, very easy to be able to go, my number is bigger than your number. And I'm sorry, but that's
Might is
kindergarten shit.
right, but with views.
It's kindergarten shit. It is I'm 12 theory. That is the problem of everything. It's that everyone is 12. Everyone is like, I want daddy
Everyone
to
is
take
12.
care of
Political
me. I
theory
want
wins
everyone to
again.
make sure that I'm safe. I want everyone to protect me from the scary minorities. It's like, oh my God, you're all insufferable. Ugh.
This serves as a nice transition into the other thing that I think we're going to talk about today, which is Sean C's
Oh,
video where he talked for a little bit about what makes a classic album. And I found his perspective very interesting because he takes a very pragmatic approach to it, which is
yeah.
like, well, did it have cultural impact? Which, that phrase all of a sudden just gave me whiplash because I can't even remember like what it was said about. It was the fucking Avatar
It was
movies.
Avatar.
That no cultural impact meme that was getting shared around a few years ago when like The Way of Water was coming out.
Yep, I remember.
Um,
I got into many fights on the internet because of that stupid fucking talking point.
And Sean C ultimately, and I think intelligently and correct in a lot of ways, comes down on, well, what moves the culture is what moves the culture. And like a classic album in a very large capital C sense is what moves the culture, what's worth being written about, what's worth examining as not just like a piece of art, but a piece of art that did something to the environment by which it entered. And he even goes so far as to say that, like, he cites Not Like Us as an example
Mm,
of, right, like, great. GNX is a great album. Mr. Morale's a great album. But Not Like Us was the last like classic that
mm.
Kendrick had because that's when he moved some kind of needle in the culture. And so I just want to extend the question, like if you had to give some kind of bulleted list of criteria that might even contradict each other, what's the criteria here for a classic album in your eyes? Let's talk about it.
This is sadly a very common talking point in music discussion these days, and I think it's because the internet has made time mean so much less than it used to mean, just as a method of distribution, as a method of forum, of the talking about things. So I kind of have an arbitrary rule in my head is that I don't really consider something a classic until it's at least like 5 years old. If we can get past like there should be a distinction. We should let time pass in order to avoid things like, just recency bias or generally speaking to see if it lasts, to see if people still talk about it. That does bring up the issue that I think people are way too like eager to throw the oh I haven't heard anyone talk about this so it proves my point lately and I'm like we live in a time where there are millions upon millions of different cultural biomes on the internet and even in real life where discussion of a given thing like I'm not gonna suddenly be like in 2020 if I was like, ah, man, fucking, I haven't heard anybody in my rural Kentucky town talk about To Pimp a Butterfly, so I guess that's not a classic. Like, no, 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 no. You got to be attuned to the fact that your perspective is extremely limited and that there might be experiences outside of yours and outside your culture that do matter when it comes to all of this. Like, there are people who still do not even really know who Bad Bunny is. And by and large, he is the biggest musician alive right now. So think about that for a moment. Like, that's an incredible dichotomy that just makes everything super weird. But to me, a classic needs to stand the test of time in that it doesn't really matter how it was received when it came out. It matters how it's received now. It's like, how did the rating trend exactly? Like, do people revisit this and be like, yeah, this is cool? Like, what's exactly, you got to contextualize it a little bit. But it also, you got to have a baseline of some kind of quality. But I feel like people get lost in the discussion because they end up trying to contextualize what a classic is to fit albums that they really like. And that's different because every album that I love that I think is a masterpiece, they're not classics to people. Like they're in some instances they could be, but just because a lot of critics or even a lot of people online deem it so, I don't necessarily think that's one. Like, let me pull an example out of a hat here. A band that I absolutely loathe every single release of and that I can't stand on any level is Motley Crue. Motley Crue sucks. Bad hair metal. Hate all of their albums, hate all of their songs. I've never heard a Motley Crue song that I liked. Shout at the Devil is a classic. It is. Like, there is no arguing that. I cannot say that that album did not earn its place in its scene and is still not widely beloved to this very day by a bunch of people who still listen to Motley Crue. So, you got to be able to apply that logic very reflexively. So, like, if you think about it in terms of like recent albums, like, that's how you kind of have the litmus test. Like, think about albums that you were listening to 5 years ago or that were big 5 years ago, or just like the pandemic or 2021, for instance. Album of the year 2020 for me, Punisher, Phoebe Bridgers. At the risk of making a complete fool of myself, I would say that that verges on classic territory for me. It was enormous. People are still waiting for the follow up very anxiously. Boy Genius has only gained momentum since. I mean, fuck, I saw them open for Taylor Swift. That's kind of insane. I remember in 2016 where I was like, boy, I hope these gals go somewhere. That that was big, and not to mention that kind of music and those essential pandemic records like How I'm Feeling Now by Charlie XCX as well. Those albums have endured as statements to the loneliness and the ennui and the dysfunction of the time, and people still say, "Hey, that was a moment, and I love that moment, and I love that album still." So, yeah, I would say that that is. But an album that I love from that year on a similar level is Uman by Slift, which is an obscure Swedish fucking garage psych band. That's not a classic. It's a 10 out of 10 record that I love so very much. It's not. It can't be. Nobody listened to it.
We also, I think when we have conversations like this, we're slightly denigrating the value of the scene and the value of the subculture when we have conversations like this. Because I don't know, I feel like some people get way too macro when talking about, like, ah, this is a classic album, because it feels like if everybody in my life doesn't know about this, then it can't be a classic album.
Yeah.
But, like, you can have artistic movements, artistic spaces, and cultural niches all have touchstones
Yes.
in the art that they consume. So, like,
Oh
I
yeah.
think we take classic album in a little bit too much of a monocultural direction when we're having to talk about people like Taylor Swift and Drake and all that, when it's like a classic album in that sense is not the same as, like, oh, what is a classic like country album from the past few years. As big as it can be, country music is still very like siloed in its listener
Mm-hmm.
base. And, what's a classic underground hip hop album, or
It's
what's a classic alternative rock album, or, like, if you're into any kind of local music scene, you have those two or three bands that everybody is expected to kind of know about and be following to kind of know what they're doing in the space that they're in. But I will say I do give credence very much to the passage of time and to the kind of identifiable impact in the comparison that can be made in the wake of a particular album release. Like, here's one that I've been thinking about, is that I think Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess is like on the way,
oh
absolutely,
yes. Yes, yes,
to
yes, yes,
classic
yes.
status. And I think that, like, When We All Fall Asleep, Where Do We Go
I
is
was
on its way
literally, I
to.
had that in the chamber because that was an album that got really bad reception when it came out. And I was like, I think I see something here. And now, years later, Billie Eilish is Billie Eilish. And I think we can look and say people were a bit harsh on that. And I would say it's probably a classic at this point.
Yeah, like, people were harsh on it, but people were trying to rip it off from the day that it dropped.
Oh,
Like,
God, yeah.
Tate McRae's early stuff was chasing that album's
That
tail. Like,
minimal kind of sound, the sparseness, the kind of the Phineas production, like that changed pop music. It absolutely did. And I mean, and I like that album, but even if I didn't, I can't refute that. And the important thing that I think we have to note here is that the context of what a classic is has also changed just because of the passage of time. Like, we're not gonna get an album like there's not gonna be an album like Rumors that is going to be released today and have the Rumors level success that it does. That is with the industry where it
I
is
would
right
say we're
now.
too far away from even getting another, like, cracked rear view.
Yeah, it's like impossible for that to happen. So like I do think that classics, the commercial domination of them is a little bit less de-emphasized. Like I do think that the rise of the alternative music press and the internet has lowered the bar on that specifically. And I think that's a good thing because I don't think you need to be double platinum to be a classic. I don't necessarily believe that that's the case. Like I know that Sean was kind of iffy on talking about some of Tyler's stuff in the video, and that's where I kind of disagreed with him because it's like I can't really think of a better example of what a classic hip hop album from the 2010s is more than Flower Boy. Like that was like on impact we felt the repercussions of what that was and we are still feeling them now. Like his production is something that like we don't have Brockhampton without that album, we don't have a ton of the modern sounds that we have without that, those blown out synthesizers and that odd future style. He had to make that mainstream and he did, and that's an effect. You can feel that now. And, same thing with like Kendrick. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue because, like, even if you hate To Pimp a Butterfly, even if you don't like Damn, I think Damn is Kendrick's weakest project. I'm not really that over the moon about it. I kind of think it's indisputable that that's a classic now because of how big it was. Like, it won him the fucking Pulitzer, and people were like, please come back for half of a decade because it was so big. And I mean, like, there is merit in it and everything. It's basically classic status to me is just how well does, like, it has to kind of jack of all trades all of the metrics you would measure a classic by, and it has to kind of whatever best hits those metrics to me. It's nebulous and it's vague, but that's kind of what I think makes this conversation frustrating, is that, like, we have to separate and delineate, like, oh, liking albums from them being classics and understanding that cultural shifts can happen without you even realizing it. But it is also like it's difficult to debate, but when you're talking about it, it's like, there's tons of people out there who I think would argue the fact that, like, who've never even heard of Sufjan Stevens. Some people who just do not know that man exists, have never heard a single song or album by them. Maybe they heard Chicago in one episode of The Bear and it completely passed them by because that's the best way you would get exposed to him. Is anyone gonna say that Michigan, Age of Odds, Carrie and Lowell, and Illinois aren't classics? Because, I mean, come on, dude. Like, if anything is, it's those albums, man. Like, I don't know. It's difficult to judge. Like, it's the internet makes everything so kaleidoscopic. It's so hard. But
I think that's the difficulty of it too, is that everybody is kind of coming at it from this new epistemic value, where like so many of the decisions on what was a classic were being made by institutions. And
mm-hmm.
when we didn't have, again, when we didn't have the internet back in the day, you didn't have the ability to like directly argue with the institutions. You could write a letter to the editor and then somebody would just throw it in the garbage. But now you can, leave a comment on a YouTube video or leave a comment under a Rolling Stone review. Popular consensus is able to change a lot more
Oh
quickly,
yeah.
and as such, it takes longer to crystallize, which is why I think that the passage of time is so important when trying to recognize like what's a classic album. Because even though I would love for Rat Boys as the Window to become a classic rock
Yes.
album, we've got a lot of time and popularity that that band needs to gain before that's going to reach that kind of status. Same with like a Big Thief, even though I would say they're
Uh,
closer to that than a band like
Dragon
Rat
Noir
Boys might be.
Mountain might get there. It might do it. Like, I feel like they're still maybe a couple big albums away from that, but I foresee that being possible.
And
So
so the ugh, I just kind of think this is a flawed concept to begin with, to be honest
it's
with
like
you.
the big three concept, where it's just like it inherently has so many limitations that it's kind of a faulty framework. Like, as an exercise here, I have pulled up Rate Your Music's top albums of 2021. It's been 5 years since these albums came out. So by my own metric, I can look at these and say, maybe some of these are classics, maybe they're not. Top album of the year is LP by JPEG Mafia. Of alternative, slightly underground hip hop, I think it would be fair to label that a classic at this point. I think that that's commonly considered Peggy's best album. And even if you don't consider it his best album, I think that it would be hard pressed to still not argue it's a great example of him and his artistry. And, like, again, he got bigger after this album and not smaller because of Scaring the Hose. So if anything, it's kind of a leapfrog effect that has actually benefited this a little bit. And after that, you have Sometimes I Might Be Introvert by Little Sims, which I also think is fair to say if you want to say that that's a classic, because
God, it's been 5 years.
5 years,
Oh my
five fucking years
God.
since this dropped. But
I
man,
remember where I was the first time I listened to LP, and it didn't even occur to me that that was 5 years ago until
right?
you mentioned Little Sims.
To talk about albums that I have reviewed on this channel and refer to them as classics makes me a little nauseous. But, like, again, number three on this list, By the Time I Get to Phoenix by Injury Reserve. If you want to localize it to alternative and underground hip hop, yeah, I mean, like, this is a literal game changer. Like, This is a big moment. And, and then afterwards, great example too, we have Lil Ugly Mane's Volcanic Bird Enemy in the voice Concern. I don't think that's a classic just because that is so relegated to its time and place on the internet and to Little Ugly Mane's fan base. I love that album. I know many people, Riley included, who would say it is, if not the best album of the decade, one of the top three. But I think it is also indisputably something that remains in the underground because that's where its lane simply is. And conversely, number six, For the First Time by Black Country New Road. Now, I know I am a Black Country New Road contrarian in many ways, but I did like this album when it came out, and I still like it now. I kind of think the cachet of this record specifically has diminished. I think that Ants from Up There kind of subsumed it, and I don't really feel like the conversation is really happening around this album the way that it used to be because it was heralded as an immediate game changer the second it came out. I remember those
And
conversations.
then
I was
Ants
there
from
for
Up
them.
There got even more hype and was
Oh
even
yeah.
more like immediately critically acclaimed.
And that was a moment, but it feels like that one had way more of an impact precisely because of the band fracturing at the moment that they did, instead of, continuing on with the same lineup and everything. So it does kind of feel like for the first time suffered in comparison. And that's not its fault. It's not any less good of an album. But yeah, I would say so. And, again, Mercurial World by Magdalena Bay, an album that admittedly I think is just fine. I love the follow up a lot, and I love songs on this album, but it's kind of okay. And it was presented as a cool alternative pop album that was from this new exciting band. And now, because of the follow up, I think that it would be fair to maybe come back and reevaluate this and consider it as a bit of a sleeper game changer. Like I could see that argument. So even in this 10 list of very big albums, we can find examples of why this concept has to be flexible.
I don't really have like a fine conclusion for this. I more so just wanted to see like what kind of conversation we could have about what a classic album even is off the back of Sean.
Yeah. And like it's difficult. It's vague. It is in many ways it's up to interpretation, but these
I think
things
I think
happen naturally though. Like you don't decide these things. They just happen.
I think our generation is working on how we're going to, on large scale, make these kinds of decisions. Now
Yeah.
that the people who like grew up largely on the internet and know, or at least more instinctually have ingrained the kind of social dynamics of the internet and the communicative styles of the internet, we're working on figuring out how to decide what like prime internet art even is.
Yeah.
And Sean talks a lot about the real world impact of like,
Mm.
you got to get off your phone and you got to get off your computer and you got to hear like what music people are actually listening to
Yeah.
outside. And that's a big deciding factor. And I definitely agree. But I do think like certified internet classic might be a thing that we have to kind of carve out a special niche
Oh,
for.
for sure. That's the thing, is that if you only relegate it to music you hear in your immediate environment, you're suffering from that biome problem that I'm talking about before, because it's you just because it's not immediately in front of you doesn't mean that people aren't listening to it. I am saying that hearing it out in the wild certainly affects why you would say something is a classic, but not hearing it doesn't exempt it from it. Like that was one point he focused on that I feel like was a little bit too finely tuned. Like I would never, ever try to say an album isn't a classic because it wasn't playing or a song wasn't playing in my immediate vicinity. Like it just means that I wasn't exposed to it through the many channels and opportunities. Again, it's like we've got radio and we've got multiple radio stations and all of this stuff, and you can separate it into demographics and what age groups use what streaming platforms, and like all of this stuff is it's so intimidating, but it's like I think that the best way to put it is that if there is an observable effect, I think it can contribute to your argument for something being classic, but I don't necessarily it inherently makes you think that like it can be against an argument for a classic either. It's like there are more factors at play, and alternative music is in many ways bigger than it ever has been. So it's like there's just different communities. Like classics to us are, again, albums that, like the ones I just mentioned. Classics to Joe Schmo who only listens to the top 40 are Sabrina Carpenter's Short and Sweet. And like,
Which that album might be on its way to
yeah,
classic status as well. Who's
could
to
be.
say?
I
Who's to
mean,
say?
very well could be. We have no idea, but like it's an argument that's easy to muddy the waters in. But I think if you zoom out a little bit and you just kind of try to take account for everything, if you can fulfill most of these requirements, if you can kind of get on the wavelength of just being honest with yourself and how popular the music you listen to actually is, because that's kind of secretly what's boiling beneath the surface of this argument is people really want their fave to be the classic. They want their faves to be the one that wins. And it's like, I get it. I get that inclination. And I understand you wanting to make tastemakers push these opinions because it's good when people appreciate good music. But you also can't force that. Like, Trout Mask Replica is kind of a classic. Are you gonna play Trout Mask Replica for your girlfriend? Are you gonna play that album for your mom or your dad? I really, really doubt it. Unless your dad is really fucking cool. And I don't know many dads I think that are that cool. Like Riley's dad I know is it fucks with like Bjork and shit, but like beyond that, fucking I don't know, man. The most adventurous thing my dad listened to was Zach Brown Band. No, I like my chicken fried.
Cold beer on
Beer on
Friday night.
Friday night.
We're the same person. All right.
If you enjoyed us chatting, spilling the tea today, talk about your opinions below, just because, I mean, I would love to hear what everyone thinks about this topic, just because it being so nebulous, it invites many different perspectives. So please add your voice to the conversation below. And as always, have a wonderful week. We will see you next time we review some new albums and, of course, on Jen and Jake's Bizarre Fray, which is going to continue to be a very normal show where normal things happen. As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer.